Good morning, everybody. There's been a couple things that I've wanted to make videos about recently, and I am going to do interview videos soon. And this is something that I kind of forswore I'd never talk about. Hopefully, though, this will be the last time that I have to. And that is the recent Stefan Molyneux video. Um, what was it titled? What I Got Wrong About Libertarians. I think the timing of this is kind of strange. The first Stefan Molyneux video that I uploaded was 4 years ago, right after I had seen him speak at PorcFest in 2012. And for those of you who don't remember, if you want to go look at it, I actually recorded that video sitting in my truck in a forest. And I recorded two videos that day, and the other video was about Obamacare. It was titled Obamacare Cometh. And it was about how, I don't think it had just passed, I think that it had been ruled constitutional by the Supreme Court during PorcFest. And I think it's kind of strange that ironic, fitting, poetic, or just coincidental that just in the last week they've had all these announcements about how the rates of Obamacare are going up and how it's overtly a disaster that was easily predictable, certainly not only by me, but by pretty much anyone who knew anything about economics or wasn't a complete libtard. Um, and it just seems weird that that would happen at the same time as Molyneux comes out with this video about libertarians. Don't say that they're correlated or connected. I just think it's kind of weird. It's an interesting perspective to kind of have uh, in a very kind of subtle way. It's not subtle now because I'm making it explicit, but it does kind of feel like not "I told you so," but like a validation of not if not predictions, at least concerns. And of course, not only I was not the first person to find fault with Stefan Molyneux or to voice those faults. Many people did. Although I do think 4 years ago he hadn't become so overt about it. Um, and so I watched this video, and I don't have, I'm not going to rebut everything in it. Not that there's too much to rebut, really. Um, I think it's more of just he's gone through a progression, and this is just kind of showing that. Um, Jim Jesus's video on this, which I watched last night, was interesting. I think he said it very well. Molyneux has a way; he's very good at speaking and at monologuing, and of putting forth a narrative, and it's very soothing and easy to listen to a point. Uh, and what will happen is he'll start to insert little points, little facts or claims or assertions, and they won't sound that alarming at first, but if you pay attention, you realize that many of them are unsupported, they're bullshit. And he'll build a sequential argument based off of these points, but they fit together in a continuum, and so there's a certain symmetry that just makes a lot of sense and sounds reasonable. But each individual point, maybe not all the points, but many of them end up on closer examination to be really dubious. They're either lies or they're distortions or they're just mistakes or who knows. And then he reaches a logical conclusion at the end, but that's contingent on all these other points. And if even one of those points is wrong, then that puts into doubt all subsequent logical claims. And with him, it's not just a single point; it's quite a few. Um, so I never take notes or anything. So there's probably a lot in his video that I could speak about that I'll just not remember to do so right now. But I think the entire video is essentially an ad hominem. If you look at the title, it says what I had wrong about libertarians, not about libertarianism. So that right there, in the video, he doesn't really provide any kind of argument against the claims that libertarians make. He doesn't break down the NAP. He doesn't break down how libertarians feel about, say, free trade or immigration or any issue really. He just attacks libertarians for either how they behave or for the views that they have without really arguing against those views individually. And to an extent, you can understand that in a single video, not arguing every point. because many of those arguments with themselves would require many videos. But I think one immediate takeaway is that this entire video is just an ad hominem against libertarians. It's not really an argument against any libertarian position, which makes it kind of not really that interesting to watch. Um, but so the first kind of argument he makes is uh, about spanking, and that he thinks that spanking is this huge issue, and he believes that in peaceful parenting and all that, and since libertarians in his view don't accept this, uh, then it shows that they don't practice what they preach, and that their priorities are not about the real world, but about you know um, Platonic theoretical theories and whatnot. And I just this is problematic on so many levels. I don't know if there's any qualitative surveys or any way to judge what percentage of libertarians are actually against peaceful parenting or practice spanking. Um, Jim Jesus pointed out in his video that all the libertarians he knows were spanked, and I fall in that category. I was spanked, not very often, but it happened, and yet I'm a libertarian, and that the people who often don't spank their children don't grow up to be libertarians necessarily, um, if at all. And this is the argument he puts forth this argument, and he's done it before, and I think I've talked about it before, and that uh, you know the best way to achieve a libertarian world is to just not spank your kids, and then they'll grow up to be libertarians. And I just think there's zero evidence for that at all. I think Anarchopac Philosophy Lines has pointed that out, that there's been a steady decline in the amount of spanking going on, but we don't see any kind of correlation, or let alone a causal relationship, with the rise in libertarianism. Although you could say, well, spanking's going down and libertarianism has kind of grown, so maybe that's the reason. But that would I don't think that the relationship is even shown to be correlative, let alone causal. But again, I don't even know where he's getting his numbers. I mean, if he's saying because in his videos about it that people come and debate it, that therefore that some libertarians object, or some of the people commenting presumably are libertarians, that all libertarians are against this, and I just don't know that that's the case. All the libertarians that I know who have ever heard their opinion on it, which granted isn't all of them, I don't broach this subject with everybody, seem to agree with peaceful parenting and don't spank their kids if they have them, or say that they wouldn't if they had kids. Uh, and I don't know what percentage of I mean, again, there are no, correct me if I'm wrong, but there are no scientific surveys about this that could tell us beyond anecdotal observations how many libertarians do or don't spank their kids. And absent that, I just don't think there's really any strong evidence. And even if you did, even if you could cobble together and be like, oh, 75% of libertarians either agree with or actively spank their kids. Again, that wouldn't really be a refutation of any libertarian argument whatsoever. It would just at best be like to say that those libertarians are hypocrites, at least in that one area. And while that might be bad for their character and might say a lot of negative things about them as people, it doesn't say anything about libertarianism. And if you want to make a video, and again, he has an out here, I don't know if he planned it this way, but he can say, well, this video is not about libertarianism, it's about libertarians, and I'm criticizing libertarians and not the ideology. But then that's totally uninteresting. It's the idea here is to have a battle of ideas to advance, reason and understanding, and how we think about the world, and to just look at somebody and be like, well, that person's a hypocrite, they're an asshole. Okay, maybe that's useful information, so we can bear that in mind when we listen to that person, but it doesn't really affect the veracity or the validity of anything they say or don't say, or the opposite. If someone's a hypocrite, it doesn't mean that their person that they argue with is necessarily correct. And so I just don't see how this is any kind of argument at all. And then he goes on to say, he's the only one who believes in peaceful parenting and spanking. I just think that's incredibly narcissistic. The anti-spanking movement goes way back before him. So I don't know. This is similar to his claims of being the greatest philosopher in 6,000 years. And then he got into circumcision, and of course, he claims that he's the only one who talks about it, and I don't fault him for not being aware that I've made several videos to that effect, and it's actually a fairly, I mean, in my interactions in those videos and when I've talked to libertarians in real life, it's almost unanimous that they're against routine infant circumcision. Obviously, people would say if you're an adult and you want to have one, then that's fine, but that's a different scenario ethically. And there hasn't been a ton of pushback. I don't get lots of libertarians going on those videos and saying you're wrong, circumcision is moral, it's not a violation of rights, it's good. There aren't that many people who argue that. Now there are some, but again, is there any survey that shows what percentage of libertarians do or don't do this? And even if there was, it would only be an indication of their, the individual hypocrisy of those individuals, not of libertarian theory or libertarian ideas or libertarianism generally. So again, this sounds more like just assuming the moral high ground and just saying, I'm this forward-thinking guy, I'm this guy who came up with these ideas, and I'm trying to tell the libertarians to come with me, and they're just not. They just don't understand. And in neither of those cases, I think, is that true, or even relevant to the arguments of libertarianism. And then I think there's an omission here, because what he didn't talk about after he talked about circumcision, as I was watching him talk about spanking, I was thinking like, well, what about circumcision? And I've heard him talk about that a few times. I don't recall him ever actually making a video explicitly about it. And then he brought it up, and I was like, hey, good for him. But then the next issue that I think is even more relevant to that would be abortion. All right, now I think it's really strange to argue that it's wrong to circumcise your newborn baby. If you have a baby, if a woman has a baby and then she goes circumcise him, and they do so really soon. They typically don't do it like immediately, but hypothetically they could. That would be a huge rights violation. That would be really terrible. And he talks about in the video how their cortisol levels are up and they're stressed for months later. But if we just rewound the clock and just before birth decided to kill the infant, like murder, not just circumcise it, to kill it, that would be okay. As far as I know, Molyneux is not against abortion. Maybe I'm wrong. If I am, someone please, specify what his views are on this. But if he is against it and he didn't mention it in the context of this, then it was quite an omission. But as far as I know, and again, I'm not going to look at the body of his work before making this video to verify this. So again, if this is a mistake, please let me know. But then all these things that he's accusing the libertarians of, all these hypocrisies would apply to him. He would basically be saying it's wrong to circumcise your baby, but not to kill it as long as you kill it before birth or before the third trimester or whatever his view is. This is very strange. I have seen this. I'm in a lot of anti-circumcision forums, and every once in a while you will get people who will tie the pro-choice, the pro-abortion argument ideology with the anti-infant circumcision, and feel like those two are like natural allies, when I think that that's completely retarded. They are completely opposite. I think you could make an argument that abortion is wrong, and then maybe argue that circumcision isn't wrong because it's an order of magnitude less severe. But I don't think you could make the argument that circumcision is wrong and that abortion is right. I don't think you can make a good argument for that anyway. People obviously do make that argument, but I think it's a pretty poor one. And so, like, this omission of his there, I just think it's kind of like the same critique he's putting on libertarians against him, which I thought was ironic. Not to dredge up the whole abortion or the whole circumcision debate again. And again, we don't have statistics on how many libertarians believe in circumcision and how many don't. We don't know how many do or don't believe in abortion. And what's so odd then is he's getting mad at libertarians because he says that spanking is the biggest violation of the NAP. And again, how do you qualify or quantify that. If it happens a lot, then yeah, it's pretty common. But how does that compare? Like how many? Let's say you have a rights violation that involves uh, killing an innocent person in a non-self-defensive way. And to go back to the abortion thing, he says circumcisions, that's not self-defense. The foreskin is not going to kill you. Well, neither is the fetus. So it's non-defensive killing of a homicide. It's the non-defensive killing of a Homo sapien that's alive. It's homicide. Like literally, it's homicide. So if you want to call it something else or whatever you can, but that's not that. It is technically homicide. Um, Now, but he talks about how, like, let's say a drone strike kills an innocent person. Okay, so that's a one rights violation, and then in the United States, then somebody spanks their kid. That's one rights violation. Okay, 1-to-1, and then two people get spanked. It's like, oh man, that's the more common rights violation. That's a bigger issue than this one person who got spanked or got drone strike to death. I don't know that there's really algebra for this, but I like the intuition, my moral intuition is that the 2 instances of spanking or the 5 instances of spanking or the 20 instances of spanking, they don't really count for, the one death. And I'm not sure that that's the argument he's making, although I think that's the argument he would have to make the claim that there's more, that it's a greater rights violation in terms of spanking than in terms of anything else. If we're talking about homicide, I don't think you need as many homicides to say it's morally more outrageous than the similar number of incidents of spanking. I just don't. And I don't think that there is any calculus that you could use to do that. I think that when we're comparing justice and ethics, I remember there's a great YouTuber, Thor's Miter Saw, who once he said, all questions of justice are by their very nature approximate. There is no way to make something as if it had never happened. We can't go back in time and just nullify a misdeed or rectify a misdeed, and so that makes it impossible to do math and be like, this is exactly what it should be. All we can do is try and figure out the closest that we can. But I think the claim that like spanking is the most biggest rights violation, even if you were talking about in terms of incidences, I don't think that would be correct, because how many people are taxed every year? Like, how many people are taxed? It's pretty much everyone, right? How many people are regulated? It's everyone, right? Now, not everyone is spanked, so I don't even know, I just think that this is an attempt to, and I said this way back 4 years ago, it's an attempt to focus on something that I think he can give himself credit for. He can't give himself credit for pointing out the rights violations involved in taxes or regulations or foreign aggression war, because many other people talk about those. And other people talk about spanking, but he's one of the more prominent people who talk about spanking. It's a smaller pond. There aren't as many philosophers or intellectuals who are pontificating about that. And so it's something, I think, this is my speculation, right? So I could be wrong about this, but this is the only explanation I can come up with, though, is that this is one thing where he can be like, I'm in the forefront of this issue. And that's why, and he wants to be seen as that. He wants to be the philosopher king. That's always been his issue, his overriding thing. And everyone has an ego, and that's fine. But like, when you get to the point when you will sacrifice, your judgment, your claims, that you'll become deceitful in order to mischaracterize things, in order to aggrandize yourself and how you're perceived, then it's a problem for anyone who's right thinking and who cares about the truth and who wants an interesting, honest, intellectually honest debate about something. You can't have that with a person like Stefan. You just can't. And not to dredge up all the claims of how he always says, front of the line for anyone who disagrees, and we know that that's not true, that they vet those people. They don't let people who are going to be articulate get in there. very strangely at some point he started talking in the video and he said, um, he brings this up and all the libertarians do is they get upset and they don't argue. They never argue. He basically says everyone who doesn't agree with him is trolling, that they're not arguing. And he had the gall to even say that they try and psychoanalyze me. I'm like, how many times have I seen or heard him, you know, derail a discussion so that he could ask somebody if they were spanked as a child? Uh, I saw Michael W. Dean here posted that when he interviewed Molyneux 4 years ago, that's exactly what happened to him. I'm thinking about a case in a call-in show where somebody called to talk about the Venus Project. The Venus Project, all right? Talk about low-hanging fruit, easy to debate in purely theoretical, empirical, practical grounds. And yet, as soon as they got into the debate, Molyneux was like, I want to ask you a question, like, were you spanked as a child? And he started to rationalize, like, well, I want to understand why someone would believe in something like the Venus Project, and the fact that you were spanked is probably what makes you believe in it. Now, I was spanked, and I never believed in the Venus Project, so, I mean, sounds like pretty shitty logic, but why the fuck would you do that? Like, I don't understand. The guy who was debating with somebody he could have mopped the floor with, I've seen him make good arguments against the Venus Project, and I know that he's a good enough speaker and debater, at that level anyway, that he could do that, and why he would have to transition into that and do it so many times. It's crazy. It's just so bizarre. And then when he makes a statement, when he says other people are psychoanalyzing him, and he looks directly at the camera, and you don't see a hint of deception. You don't see, and this is like my question. I want to know. I don't really care. But what my brain wonders is, because it doesn't matter. I don't watch his videos anymore, and I think that he's jumped the shark with anyone who matters, and he's just become a popular right wing guy now at this point. And good for him for that. He's gone from nobody to somebody who's marginally known on the periphery of the mainstream media. Congratulations. But is he like consciously aware of his deception, or is he delusional? Does he believe his own shit and just erases from his mind all the times he's brought up other people, whether they were spanked or not, how they were treated by their mothers or their fathers or their siblings, and to the point of like, even if your family never spanked you, even if they treated you well, then that would just be, he would just say you were being psychologically manipulated, that they were manipulating you with kindness and false love, and because the only true love is people who accept Molyneux, who accept the UPB, and if they don't, then they truly hate you, and the against me argument and all that. And here's the other thing, he's all up on libertarians and say, oh, they're all hypocrites and they all violate the NAP because they spank and they get circumcised, or they circumcise their kids, and that's all terrible, and they're hypocrites. And then he's like, Trump, 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 and it's like, well, Jesus Christ, talk about NAP violations. Like, who do you think that the border patrol is going to be armed with foam pool noodles? Like, Jesus Christ, like, why is it like that Trump, I mean, I've if I hadn't made it clear in other videos, like, I think Trump is the lesser of the two evils compared to Hillary, although I could be wrong about that. But he's still fucking evil. He's a soft-core American-style fascist, egomaniac, which maybe that's why Molyneux likes him so much. I don't know. And his policies, he's for tariffs, he's for stringent border control, he's for, I heard his Gettysburg speech. There's stuff there that's better than Hillary, and there's stuff about him that I like, but there's a ton of shit that's terrible, way worse than not vociferously not spanking your kids enough, or anything like that. I mean, as far as I know, Donald Trump is not against spanking, and he's not against circumcision. So he's got all the problems that libertarians have, plus a host of other ones. So why is he wrong about libertarians but not wrong about Donald Trump? It just don't, the double standard. And then he talks about libertarians don't do anything. Which ones again? Which ones? You can go on YouTube and you can spend all day watching, libertarian activists getting open carrying with guns, confronting police at checkpoints, handing out leaflets, giving speeches, spreading their ideas person to person, not just online. Uh, in many cases, voting, petitions. He's been to Porkfest. Obviously, he knows about the Free State. We've got thousands of libertarians who up and moved here just to be activists. And and I'm only listing the meniscus things that I can think of, and yeah, sure, there's plenty of libertarians who live in a basement and have a job and don't do anything libertarian, and like, okay, so that means that their ideas are wrong, that they're bad people. I mean, everyone's in different circumstances. If you tell someone who's 16 and lives at home, has no job necessarily, or is stuck in school, like, Jesus, yeah, you're a hypocrite because you haven't seasteaded yet. I mean, come on. Or who has a family. I have libertarians, they're not young necessarily, but they've got a wife, they've got kids. They can't go move to New Hampshire. They can't quit their job and do that necessarily. That's asking a ton of them, you know, uh, and to just kind of, oh, they don't do anything. What does Molyneux do? Molyneux is on the internet. Molyneux does stuff on the internet and he gives speeches that go on the internet. What does he actually do? Is that an argument that everything he says is wrong and that he's a hypocrite? Not that. I mean, there's other reasons that I would call him that, but not for that reason. And then it ignores the people who have, say, joined the Free State, moved here, actually do things. Do FIJA outreach, jury nullification outreach. I just don't understand, where this is coming from, and how many, and many libertarians do vote. I mean, yeah, there's they're anti-political ones. I'm not of the opinion that voting is immoral. I think it's mostly a waste of time. I think if everyone got outside and flapped their arms, there's a chance that we could change the course of the weather that day for some, the butterfly effect and all that. But is it worth my time to go do that? No. And I feel very similar about voting in most circumstances, at least at the national level. I think that argument is less valid if you're talking about local elections where dozens or hundreds or even a few thousand votes, might make a difference. Fine. But libertarians are all about that. They do that all the time. So, like, and if he's going to say, well, they don't have as much success as I would like, well, they're a minority. There are very few libertarians. And to say, well, there's only a few of you, so you don't have as much electoral success, so you're full of shit. I just don't understand that. Now, maybe they're not running things as smartly as they could, and that's almost definitely true, because it's kind of silly to assume that anyone is doing optimally the best thing that they could in whatever circumstance they're in. And that's definitely true for libertarians. I haven't really analyzed it to any huge degree, but I highly doubt that the way that the Libertarian Party has run its campaigns, which have not always been the same, is the best possible way they could have done it, or if it even should be done through an independent party and not within one of the main parties. I think there's more promise in a split of the Republican Party into a more libertarian wing than there is in the LP, but that's strategy. That's a mistake in strategy. That's not a mistake in in being lazy or not doing, not or just not trying to act. That's just a strategic error, not a personal flaw or an ethical flaw. And again, I think that's hypocritical, because what does he do? He lives in Canada. Like, has he stopped Trudeau from becoming the prime minister? Has he done anything to stem the Leviathan of the Canadian state, or the American state for that matter? And the answer is clearly no. So why is it that other libertarians, they're all guilty of failure or hypocrisy, but not Molyneux? I don't understand. Like, again, it's very much a case of distinguishing himself from everybody else, which is what he wants. He wants to be distinguished, and that's fine that he wants that. Just don't fucking, mischaracterize everybody else in order to achieve that status. Like, achieve it by being an intellectual, about having good ideas, not just being eloquent about shitty ideas. It's not even that eloquent anymore. I mean, I don't watch it. It's just when I was speaking earlier and I was saying, well, it sounds kind of plausible. Like I'm way past the point of actually ever feeling that way about what he says. It just sounds stupid to me. You know, it just and his eyes. You know, it's not beyond the realm of possibility that there's a sociopath behind that. You know, who I who will straight lie to Joe Rogan. Oh, my wife never got in trouble. That's all a lie. Completely lie. Never happened. Never happened. Never happened. My wife never got in any kind of trouble whatsoever. She did get in trouble. Now, if we want to say that that kind of trouble was stupid or unjustified or whatever, fine. But to say that it never happened, blatantly false. Blatantly false. And the whole DMCA thing, and yeah, talk about hypocrisy. No, or bullying. If we haven't seen how he bullies people in his interviews, so I think that starting, I think the stuff with Zimmerman was a huge thing. He got a huge increase in his viewership at that point, but it was a different demographic. It was more of the conservative white right wing people who I don't have tons of faults with those people. I mean, I disagree with them on some things. They're not bad people necessarily, and it's fine to reach out to them. But he's needed that libertarian niche less and less and less, and I think it's at this point becoming more of a liability for him, in his opinion. And they make him look bad because he's fucking not principled. You know, how many times did we have to hear that UPB is the answer to everything? He doesn't even talk about it anymore. If it was so, come out and just say, hey, I was wrong. Don't say, and that's the other thing. He doesn't say I've changed or I was wrong about things I believe or my positions were wrong. He said I was wrong about libertarians. Basically, the whole point of the video is to make it sound like libertarians are this recalcitrant bunch of ne'er-do-wells, and he just had a high opinion of us, and he's now learned that he shouldn't have that high opinion any longer. I say as I sit here without my shirt on. Um, it's like a pathological inability to admit that he might have been actually wrong, and some of the ideas that he believed in were false. Uh, so I don't know. I don't think it's a huge deal. I don't think this video is particularly surprising to anyone who's been watching him for a while. He has enough, mindless sycophants that looking at the comments, there's plenty of people like, this is beautiful, and this is blah, 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 like, and I'm sure he eats that shit up, and, that's all that he needs besides money, and, he doesn't care if right-thinking libertarians or critically thinking libertarians, if right-thinking is too deontologically, suggestive. Uh, he doesn't need them anymore, and it's just a liability. He's on the Trump Reagan, and the alt right maybe, or the regular right, or who knows. Like, it doesn't really matter. It's just people did ask me about the video. I do think it's kind of interesting. Like, it's kind of come not full circle, but it's reached a point of clarity. Not clarity in the sense that we know everything about him and what goes on in his mind, but that the philosopher king of his imagination is not there, and probably never was. Definitely never was. And yeah, it's kind of sad, but it happens. So anyway, there'll be more videos soon. I'll probably do one about the election before the election, and some other good stuff. So keep in touch, and I'll talk to you all later.